Hey, this is JC in the Woods. Just a quick warning as we start this hike. Don't forget that I don't believe that there is a conspiracy of rich people trying to use fractional reserve banking to usher in a totalitarian one world government. That would be ridiculous. But it's really fun to walk in the park and to walk in the woods and think about those things, especially because current events always seem to fit so nicely into that story. Let's take a walk in the woods. Okay, first of all, no bullshit here. We are at 255,000 cases worldwide and approximately 10,000 dead. There are some 40,000 cases in Italy and about 3,500 dead there reported. So it seems like it's a real biological contagion that's spreading around the world right now. Don't let anyone watching this video think for 1 second that I'm suggesting that this is a hoax, that this is not real. Either way you look at it, however the NWO is doing this, they're definitely not doing it with fakeness. 9/11 was not fake airplanes. 9/11 is not fake buildings falling down. The question is, what are the underlying causes and effects that are actually at play here? And are we being played for theater, or is this really something that we need to be frightened about? And that's what I want to talk about on this walk. So I wanted to talk about the idea that, first and foremost, all the distractions are to keep you away from thinking about fractional reserve banking. And I'm always going to start one of these walks with saying that, because that's the message that I want to send. It's not a message about, dissonance or running against the state. It's just realizing that the banking system as a whole is really corrupt. And if we want to actually escape the prison that we're in, the way that we're going to do it is to change our banking system and to take away this power of fractional reserve banking from the select few people who have control over it and give it back to our governments the way it was codified in our own Constitution. Please don't misunderstand me as we walk through the woods. It's not that I believe that there's some kind of hoax going on, that there is no biological contagion traveling the planet. Oh, I'm sure that there is. My question is this orchestrated or not? Is it theater or not? You can use a biological contagion to create theater. And that's what I'm talking about here. One thing to keep in mind is that they are going to try and make a lot of money on vaccines and a lot of money on tests, even though the tests and the vaccines are both kind of a ruse. The test is a ruse because depending on the primers you choose, the number of false positives and that you can get can sometimes be quite phenomenal. And given the fact that we know so much about coronavirus, it's not going to be about making a test that's effective simply because this coronavirus is mutating its way across the planet. You can see that from the Next Strain website. If this data is correct, we won't need one vaccine, we'll need several. And that means, again, big profits for big pharma. On the other hand, imagine if this is one of two likely possibilities that the New World Order is either manufacturing a crisis or the New World Order has created a crisis. And either way, the New World Order is going to use this to forward their agenda of an ever-expanding control over our financial system in a way that will allow them to take the real value out while allowing us to play cards with fake money. One plausible scenario for what happened in Wuhan is that you essentially had a benign respiratory virus that was released in a population with no immunity at all to it. It traveled very rapidly through this dense population in Wuhan, and the people in Wuhan were especially vulnerable to heavier secondary infections because of the population, because of the pollution in Wuhan. We know already from the pictures and the satellite images showing the decrease in pollution in Wuhan that that place was not a very nice place to live. And environmentally speaking, their lungs were already full of particulates and heavy metals. And so the idea that these people would have a propensity to develop a very rapid secondary infection in response to a relatively benign but novel respiratory virus is beyond reasonable and probably likely. So with the rain, I'm going to have to hurry this up a little bit. The gist of it is this. There's two possibilities here, both of which the NWO could have easily orchestrated. The first one is we could have a relatively benign coronavirus, which they're using as a marker for a pandemic, but it's actually not the cause of any of the deaths. This has been suggested by more than one doctor, including doctors in China. So this would also explain why the dual therapies of antiviral and antibiotic drugs are often having an effect on these severely ill patients. So this is an interesting lead to follow up. The main thing to remember is that if this is not a benign virus, then you're still dealing with the New World Order, and they're just attacking China. I think you can't underestimate the fact that the New World Order pretty much has a grip mostly on the UK and on America, but parts of the EU might still be free. In addition, I do think very recently Russia has started to collaborate with the cause, and that's the reason why we're not seeing a lot of activity in Russia. On the other hand, this attack hit China and Iran hard. And very specifically and interestingly, it hit Iran's ruling class quite hard, which again seems to be either really lucky or kind of creepy. So, think about this carefully as you maneuver through the next few weeks. Don't be manipulated into being too frightened or to acting rashly. I'm not suggesting that we should break quarantine. I'm not suggesting that this is not a biological contagion. Quite the opposite. I'm suggesting that the New World Order would definitely use a biological contagion, probably of its own creation, in order to create this crisis. So what would we expect to see if the NWO was actually orchestrating this little coronavirus pandemic and using it to their advantage? Well, a couple things I think we'd see. The first thing I think we'd see is that CEOs might be quitting their companies at a different level than they normally do. That's because the vast majority of them will be connected enough to know that there's a good reason to sell your stock now. Another thing you might see are senators or people in the government who are connected to this orchestrated little hoax would also be selling stocks, maybe even months ago. If I were you guys, I'd check in November, December, and January, because those are the people who knew that this was going to become much more serious before the rest of us did. The one part of this story that I'd really like to get correct is that when you hear people saying that we couldn't have made this virus, they're not telling you the truth. It's exactly the same as Condoleezza Rice saying that we could have never imagined them crashing airplanes into the Twin Towers. That's absurd because they actually ran drills specifically about that. So what we're talking about here are people who have run drills about a pandemic. They ran those drills starting in October. They ran them in cooperation with China and the rest of the world. Those drills were those drills were coordinated by none other than the Gates Foundation and the very people who are bringing you the Johns Hopkins website tracker right now. They used the exact same software in that simulation 5 months ago. Now, you can say that's a coincidence, but the exact same thing happened before 9/11, and the exact same thing happened before the Tube attack in London. A lot of these false flags events are oftentimes occurring simultaneously with a drill very similar to them, or they are preceded by a drill very similar to them before the actual event occurs. And that seems to have happened again here with this pandemic, even including the actual drama, which is that it started in China. I mean, just think deeply about it for 1 second. The germaphobe, Donald Trump, isn't really worried about a pandemic. The guy who's afraid to shake hands with people and yells at people in meetings for coughing. Please leave the room. Get out of here. I can't believe you're coughing. That guy isn't afraid of a pandemic. The main thing to keep in mind here is that this is about hiding the main gambit. It's about distraction. It's about making sure that you have enough contradiction in your head so that you can't think straight. This is the prison that they keep us in. By giving you information that's contradictory all the time, you can never pick the truth. And that's very, 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 that's very, very psychologically damaging. And we've all grown up in a world like this, where nothing is as it seems, and everything is contradicted every day. This is the prison they hold us in. And one of the ways that they keep us from freeing ourselves from this prison is keeping us apart. We need to work together. And so as long as we pick one side, we are playing along with the theater. If we want to break the spell of the New World Order, we have to stop choosing a side and start choosing each other. So, what are the two New World Order scenarios that make sense biologically? Well, the first one is that it's a benign pandemic. We are following a benign coronavirus as it moves through the human ecosystem. And we are following it with RT-PCR. But actually, all the deaths that are associated with this disease, or with this virus rather, are simply the opening of the epithelium in the lungs, and always a secondary infection like bacterial pneumonia kills these people. So here you are, thinking about, wait a minute, so you're saying that we don't know for sure if this virus causes any of the symptoms that we see? That's technically correct. There is a postulate in immunology where you must first purify the pathogen and then infect a healthy individual and recapitulate the disease in a healthy individual with the cultured pathogen in order to prove that the pathogen causes the disease. This hasn't been done with the novel coronavirus, and they won't do it. And that's because this is probably the case, that it's actually largely benign. And so they're using the spread of this novel easy to track because they selected it to be easy to track. All they had to do was select a novel coronavirus from the bat library that was sufficiently different from the common cold and the common flu so that it could be tracked for a long time despite its tendency to mutate. That's one of the tricks of this thing. You can see from the 700 odd genomes that are on next strain that this thing is mutating quite rapidly, and so they would have a problem if it was too closely related structurally or molecularly to known coronaviruses, because it would just be too tough to track and too hard to fool real scientists that, hey, there's a novel virus going around. Again, I have no question that there's a novel virus going around. I just have a question of whether it's responsible for any deaths that we need to be alarmed about. Or if it's really just an excuse for them to usher in all kinds of changes that we would otherwise never assent to. And just like 9/11, I think there's lots of evidence to believe that that's indeed the case. So one of the things that really has annoyed me lately is how many people have gone on the news and other news media to say that we could have never made this virus. I am an armchair biologist, but I can tell you for sure from my reading that is an absolute total falsehood. It's just like Condoleezza Rice saying that we could have never imagined they would crash airplanes into buildings. Also baloney. In 2002, we already exclaimed to the world that we could make RNA viruses genome size unlimited. There's a PNAS paper from around 2000 or 2002 which also demonstrates that we had the technology then. About 10 years of research following that is us cataloging coronaviruses, finding coronaviruses in the wild, trying to understand their structure with crystallization, trying to understand how their spike proteins interact with our receptors. We have made mice which express human receptors so that we can use those mice as models to study how coronavirus infections work and how coronaviruses evolve inside of their hosts. We have developed tissue culture methods so that we can make effectively lung or pulmonary tracheal bronchial epithelium in laboratory preps so that we can study how viruses, specifically coronaviruses involved in respiratory infections, interact with lung epithelial cells. We have used animals to grow viruses and to extract from them a new library of viruses. We have gone in the wild and collected viruses from the bats all over China. And we've done it for years. So to say that we couldn't have found a virus like this and combined it with a spike protein that we understood and created a novel coronavirus that was easy to track molecularly as it spread around the planet, whether or not it ends up to be a benign pandemic that we're using just as a molecular scam, a molecular hoax, or whether it turns out to be a real deadly bug, a terrible virus that hurts millions of people. The idea that we couldn't have made it is absurd. And these people are just saying what needs to be said so that the next stage of this drama can unfold. That's what they're doing. The question is, what's going to happen now? And are you going to be awake for it? I just can't believe that Tulsi endorsed Biden. How is that possible? How can you not see that this is just blatant puppeteering? She has decided to join the club. They gave her keys to the executive bathroom and now she's playing along just like the rest of them. I was really sorry to see it happen. The only thing left now is for Bernie to endorse Biden and the theater is complete. I personally think that Bernie Sanders is probably just doing this at the point of a gun. I don't think he actually wanted to run, and if he did want to run, I'm afraid that he's the only real, genuine candidate. You might not agree with all the things that he wants, but he's not evil, and I don't think he's a NWO member. I think he's actually just trying to make a difference in the world, and they used him as best they could. They used Yang and Tulsi and Elizabeth and Buttigieg. They used those all to stamp out the youth movement that Bernie had started 4 years ago, and Bernie probably could have used to win easily, but anyway. I think I'm just going to stop it there. All right. See you guys. Thanks. Hey, if you liked it, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time when we're walking in the woods. Unfortunately, I got a lot of rain here, so I'm going to have to walk back soon. I guess it's the New World Order trying to stop me from getting this information out by controlling the weather with HAARP.